You'll ruin her wedding. That's what my mother said, not softly, not kindly, but like she was spitting out something sour. The kitchen smelled of roses and coffee that morning, yet her voice made it feel like winter. I stood there holding my teacup, the steam curling into my face, hiding the tremble in my lips. I wasn't planning to cause a scene, I said. My voice came out calm, almost too calm. Calm is what they always hated most about me. It made them nervous, as if I might know something they didn't. They said I'd ruin her wedding, so I stayed home. But what happened that night made me wish I'd gone. Watch till the end. You'll understand why silence can be the loudest revenge. You never plan, she snapped. You just make people uncomfortable. Let your sister have her moment. Her moment. Those words had followed me my entire life. Her moment to speak, her moment to shine, her moment to be loved. Me. My role was always to disappear gracefully, the quiet shadow at the edge of the family photo. That morning I did what they expected. I nodded, washed my cup, and left the house without another word. But as the warm water ran over my fingers, I caught my reflection in the window, and I smiled. Not bitterly, not sadly. Just a quiet, knowing smile. Because they'd forgotten that shadows always see what light cannot. I spent the afternoon alone. The clock ticked lazily against the silence. Outside, children rode bicycles through puddles from last night's rain. I sat by the window watching the sunlight shift across the floorboards, painting them gold, then pale, then cold again. Her wedding was supposed to start at 6. I pictured it without trying. The floral arch, the champagne laughter, the way my sister would tilt her chin up like a queen. She'd always loved the performance of it all. I could almost hear my mother saying, "See? Doesn't she look perfect?" Perfect. Yes, that word again. The one that had never belonged to me. I made myself tea the same way I always did. 1 spoon of sugar, 2 of silence. My phone buzzed every few minutes with family photos and forced smiles. My aunt sent a picture of the bride and groom holding hands, writing, "Wish you were here." I stared at the photo. Her husband, tall, polished, handsome enough for a magazine. But even through the filtered glow, his smile didn't reach his eyes. I'd seen that kind of smile before, on men who liked control more than love. I had once warned her about him. She'd laughed. "You're just jealous." Jealous. Another family favorite. I muted the group chat and turned on the TV just to fill the room with noise. The local station had live coverage of the wedding. It was that grand. I watched from my worn-out sofa as if it were a movie I'd already seen. My sister, in her ivory dress, looked radiant. My mother glowed beside her, beaming like she'd birthed a royal. And then it happened. The camera caught a flash of movement. The groom's hand raised too fast. A sound sharp and wrong cut through the ballroom music. Gasps. A few guests stepped back. My sister's face twisted, her hand over her cheek. The reporter's voice faltered. Then the feed cut off. I didn't move. I didn't gasp or drop my cup. I just sat there watching the reflection of my own calm face in the black screen. The irony tasted like sugar in my mouth. An hour later, the phone started ringing. My mother, my aunt, even my neighbor. All talking at once. Words like unbelievable. He hit her. The police. And disgrace blurred into a static hum. I listened for a while, then quietly set the phone down. They hadn't wanted me there. Now they were all part of the disaster they feared I'd cause. The clock struck 10. The neighborhood went quiet. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then stopped. I looked around the small house, my small, peaceful house, and realized it was the first time in years I didn't feel lesser. I walked into my bedroom and knelt beside the wooden chest under my bed. The key was still in its velvet pouch, the one I'd kept for reasons even I couldn't explain until that moment. When I unlocked it, the hinges groaned like old bones. Inside lay folders, letters, flash drives. My quiet ledger. Every secret I'd gathered without meaning to. Her husband's previous marriage certificate. His hidden debts. My sister's fake charity documents. The email she sent our mother, asking her to transfer part of my inheritance to her account, just to even things out. They thought I was weak. They thought I was done. They had no idea how much truth I had kept in silence. I touched one folder lightly, the one labeled June 12th. The date she'd lied about where she was, saying she was volunteering. I had found the truth long ago but said nothing. Back then I still believed silence was dignity. Tonight I understood silence could also be power. At midnight, the rain returned, soft at first, then hard enough to drown the world in sound. I sat by the window again, holding one of the letters between my fingers. It was written in my father's handwriting. His will, the one no one knew I had the copy of. I remembered the night before he died. He had whispered to me, "Keep records, my girl. People forget, but paper remembers." He was right. Paper remembers. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, I smiled again. Tomorrow, the world would talk about my sister's humiliation. They'd call her the victim. They'd pity her. But they'd never know that beneath the pity, truth was waiting, neat, dated, and ready to be opened. I stood, closed the chest, and locked it. The rain softened, the night went still again. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the slow tick of the clock, the sound of my own heartbeat finally steady. I walked to the mirror. My hair had come loose, silver strands falling across my face. For a moment I looked like my mother, but older, calmer, sharper. I whispered to my reflection, "You told me I'd ruin her wedding." Then after a small pause I added, "Maybe I will. Just not the way you think." The next morning smelled like wet soil and newsprint. The headlines had already begun. Local wedding ends in violence. Reporters waited outside my sister's in-laws' home. Photos leaked. The slap, the shock, the fall of a tiara. I turned off the TV before they reached her name. A car stopped outside. I peeked through the curtain. My mother stepping out, clutching her purse like it could hold her shame. She didn't knock immediately. She stood in the drizzle, hesitating, the queen without her crown. When she finally entered, she looked at me differently, not angry, not superior. Just small. "It was awful," she said softly. "Everyone saw it." "I saw it too," I replied. "From home." Her lips pressed tight. "You don't have to sound pleased." "I'm not pleased," I said, folding the dish towel neatly. "Just not surprised." She looked around the house like she'd never noticed it before. The clean counters, the soft light, the peace. Maybe she expected guilt. Maybe she wanted comfort. I gave her neither. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. The sound of the door closing was gentle, almost polite. As evening returned, the neighborhood lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, the kind that starts small and grows until it fades again. I sat back down, poured myself tea, and opened my notebook. I didn't write much. Just one line, underlined twice. They told me not to come. But my truth will. And for the first time in years I felt at peace. I had no need to raise my voice, no need to step into their spotlight. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives quietly with the morning mail. The kettle whistled behind me. The clock struck midnight again. I smiled, leaned back, and whispered to the empty room. They told me I'd ruin her wedding. They were right. And now, sitting in the dim light of my bedroom, I realized the wedding was only the beginning. The rain had stopped, leaving the night heavy with that earthy after-storm scent. I could hear drops sliding down the gutter outside, steady, patient, the way my heart had learned to be. I knelt beside the bed, fingers brushing the cool floorboards until they found the edge of the wooden box. It wasn't beautiful, just an old chest the color of burnt oak, its corners softened by time. My father had built it decades ago, long before my mother learned how to make people feel small with her words. I pulled it out carefully, the wood grating softly against the floor. When I lifted the lid, the faint smell of cedar and old paper rose up, familiar and oddly comforting. Inside lay the quiet years of my life. Neat, labeled, patient. Letters. Photos. Receipts. A few things no one knew I'd kept. I traced my fingers over the folders, each one marked in my handwriting. His debts. Her transfers. June 12th. The ink had faded, but the memories hadn't. For years I had told myself it was foolish, this habit of saving evidence. My sister used to laugh, saying, "You treat life like a courtroom." Maybe she was right. But some of us collect memories. Others collect proof. I took out the first folder, the one labeled his debts. It contained copies of loan slips, unpaid taxes, a few court warnings addressed to her husband long before she met him. I remembered the day I'd found them. I had been helping a neighbor at the notary's office when I saw his name on the public notice board. He owed money, a lot of it. When I'd told my sister back then, she'd brushed it off. He said, "It's all a misunderstanding," she'd said. "You always expect the worst in people." Maybe I did. But people rarely prove me wrong. I smiled faintly, reading the amounts again. They weren't just debts. They were anchors dragging him closer to the truth I was about to let surface. The second folder was thicker. Her transfers. That one still made my chest tighten. I had discovered it after our mother's surgery, when the hospital bills didn't match the money withdrawn from the joint account. My sister had quietly moved funds, calling it temporary. When I'd confronted her then, she'd said, "Don't act like you care about money. You've never had any." He was right again. I didn't care about money, only fairness. The receipts still bore her handwriting, curling and proud. I ran my thumb over the ink until it smudged slightly. Once I would have torn them up just to stop remembering. Tonight I pressed them flatter, smoother. Every mark was a confession she'd written herself. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The house creaked, the kind of small, ordinary sound that makes loneliness feel alive. I got up to pour myself tea, the familiar steps grounding me. The kettle hissed softly, the smell of jasmine filling the kitchen. As I waited, I looked at the small clock above the sink. Past midnight again. Somewhere out there, the wedding guests were probably still talking. In small towns like ours, gossip spreads faster than lightning. My mother would be begging people to keep it private. My sister would be crying, pretending shock, rehearsing lines for sympathy. I stirred the tea and smiled. Let them talk. Let her cry. I had spent my whole life apologizing for being the disappointment. Now silence was finally working for me. Back in the bedroom, I lit a small lamp, the one with the cream shade my father had bought at a yard sale years ago. Its light was soft, golden, perfect for secrets. The next envelope I opened was different, thicker paper neatly sealed. The label read, "The Trust Papers." I hadn't looked at them in years. My father had left a trust that split our inheritance evenly between us, but something about the final numbers had never added up. When I'd questioned my mother, she told me I was mistaken. "You don't understand finances." But I did. Always did. Inside was a copy of the will, and attached a separate page signed only by my sister. A forged transfer request. The signature looked rushed, clumsy. Back then, I hadn't had the courage to call it out. I'd been tired of being painted bitter, jealous, dramatic. Tonight, tired had turned into clear. I picked up my pen and began to underline each forged date, each discrepancy. It felt methodical, almost soothing, like mending a torn fabric that had finally come back into my hands. A faint knock startled me. I froze. 3 gentle taps, not police, not neighbors. I opened the door a crack. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Doyle, her gray hair damp from the rain. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "You doing all right?" Her eyes were kind, the kind that noticed things without prying. "I'm fine," I said. "Just couldn't sleep." She looked past me and spotted the papers on my table. "Still keeping records, huh?" she said with a small smile. "Old habits," I replied. She nodded. "Sometimes they save you." Then she left as quietly as she came. Her words lingered longer than the visit. By 2 a.m. the folders were spread across my table like a crime board. Only this time the crime was survival. I made lists, not of revenge but of truth. Who needed to see what? Who would understand? Who would finally stop believing my sister's perfect smile? One list was practical. Banks, employers, tax offices. The other was personal. Family, friends, church members, the people whose opinions had weighed on me like stone. Each name I wrote felt lighter than the last. Around 3 my phone buzzed. An incoming message from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "You watching?" No punctuation, no name. But I knew. Her husband. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. He must have seen the news cycle twisting against him already. Maybe he thought I'd pick a side. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of the folder labeled his debts and attached it to an unsent draft email. No words, just the image. I saved it under tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow doesn't need a plan. Just readiness. The clock kept ticking, patient and steady. I thought of my father again, how he used to sit at this same table, reading the newspaper with his glasses halfway down his nose. He once told me, "The world pretends to fear storms, but storms clean what people won't." Maybe that's what I was doing. Cleaning. Quietly. I glanced at the final envelope, unlabeled, sealed with red wax. I'd almost forgotten about it. When I opened it, I found an old photograph. My sister and me as children sitting on the back steps, her hand around my shoulder, both of us smiling with missing teeth. Behind the photo, a note, in my father's handwriting again. Whichever of you keeps this, keep it wisely. It hit harder than I expected. For a second my throat tightened. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that wished we'd stayed those two girls. Before jealousy, before favoritism, before betrayal. But innocence is a door that only closes once. I slipped the photo back into the envelope and placed it on top of the pile. Dawn crept in slowly, painting the curtains pale blue. Birds began to stir outside. The night had ended, but the quiet didn't leave. I gathered the folders, stacking them neatly again. The box wasn't heavy, but it carried weight, years of silence condensed into evidence. I tied it shut with a thin ribbon and slid it back beneath the bed. Not to hide it, but to keep it waiting. As I stood, my back ached faintly, the way it does when you've carried too much for too long. I stretched, breathing deeply. The air smelled like rain and ink. Then the phone rang again, my mother. I let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. Her voice was tight. "She's not home," she said. "He disappeared after the fight. The police are looking for him. People are calling. What should we do?" I looked down at the bed, at the floor, at the small shadow where the box rested. "Nothing," I said. "You should do nothing." Silence. Then a shaky breath on the other end. "You sound different," she whispered. "I am," I said softly. "I'm done being what you remember." I hung up. The sun was up fully now, bright enough to show the dust in the air. I opened the window. The breeze carried the faint scent of wet grass and far-off smoke. Someone already burning the remains of yesterday. I watched the street wake up. Milkman's school bus, people pretending life hadn't changed overnight. I didn't feel proud. Or angry. Just certain. The ledger beneath my bed wasn't revenge yet. It was truth waiting for the right moment. And for the first time I knew that moment was coming. And when it did, it arrived quietly, like morning mail sliding through a door slot, unnoticed until it lands. The sun had barely risen when I sat at the kitchen table again, the one that had seen everything from childhood breakfasts to family arguments. The box lay open beside my teacup. I wasn't trembling anymore. My hands moved with a stillness I didn't recognize, like they had finally remembered what purpose felt like. Outside, a milk truck rattled down the lane. The postman's bicycle bell chimed faintly, a sound I'd heard for 40 years and never really listened to. Now every sound felt important. Every second mattered. I took a small stack of brown envelopes from the drawer, plain, unmarked, ordinary. The kind you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing. One by one I began to fill them. No letters. No explanations. Only copies. The first envelope went to his company. I'd printed the unpaid loan slips from the folder labeled his debts. Each page bore his signature, his arrogance in black ink. I sealed it, pressed the flap shut and slid it aside. The second went to her workplace, the charity foundation my sister had used to polish her image. Inside that one I placed the forged receipts and transfer records. Enough to raise questions. Enough to make them look twice. The third was for the local newspaper editor, an old acquaintance from my days volunteering at the library. I didn't need to sign it. Truth doesn't require a name. As I stacked the envelopes neatly, a faint smile crept across my face. For years my family had spoken louder than me. They mistook volume for power. But this quiet work, this calm precision, felt louder than any shout I could ever give. By 8 the post office had opened. The air outside still carried the cool of morning. The world looked freshly washed, puddles glittered under the sun, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and brewing coffee from the cafe down the street. I wore a simple cardigan, gray and unassuming, the kind that makes you invisible. People greeted me politely, the way they always had, kind enough to pretend they didn't remember the rumors about my jealous streak. At the post office counter, the clerk, a young man with sleepy eyes, barely looked up as I slid the envelopes toward him. "Regular delivery?" he asked. "Yes," I said, then paused. "Actually, registered. I'd like to know they reach." He nodded, stamping each one with a dull thud that echoed faintly in the small room. Thud. "To the company." Thud. "To the foundation." Thud. "To the newspaper." Each stamp felt like a closing door, one I'd kept open far too long. Back home I set the kettle on again. The quiet hum of boiling water felt heavier today. I sat down by the window, tea in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Children ran for their buses. A dog barked at nothing. Someone watered plants across the street. The world looked ordinary. And yet I could feel the invisible wires I'd set in motion. Letters traveling down roads, hands opening envelopes, eyes widening, whispers beginning. By noon I got the first message. It wasn't from my family, not yet. It was from Mrs. Doyle. She texted, "Your sister's foundation just got mentioned on the radio. Something about an internal review. You know anything?" I typed slowly. No, I hadn't heard. Must be serious. Then turned off my phone. At 2 the sky darkened again, quick, sudden clouds rolling in like gossip itself. I walked to the back porch, letting the cool air brush my face. The garden smelled of rain-soaked mint. I'd planted it years ago when life still felt simple. As I stood there, I thought about how easily truth hides in plain sight, how years of polite silence can disguise rot. My sister's world had been built on performance, and now the stage lights were flickering. The phone rang again. This time it was my mother. "Your sister's in pieces," she said without greeting. "Reporters called. The charity board is furious. They say there were irregularities." I let the silence stretch. "Mom," she said sharply. "You're quiet." "I'm listening," I said softly. "Something you've never done." Her breath caught on the other end. "You think this is funny?" "No," I replied. "I think it's overdue." She muttered something about shame, about family, about God's punishment. I almost laughed. "God had nothing to do with it," I said. "Just paperwork." Then I hung up. The next day I went into town to pick up groceries. I could feel eyes on me, small-town curiosity, cautious, sharp. At the newspaper stand, 2 women whispered, glancing at a headline that made my stomach tighten with satisfaction. "Charity under investigation. Alleged fraud and missing funds." I didn't need to buy the paper. The words were already burned into my memory. At the market, Mrs. Doyle caught up to me again. "It's everywhere," she whispered. "They're saying the groom's company froze his accounts. Something about tax evasion." I smiled faintly. Maybe luck finally ran out for him. "Or maybe karma works nights," she said with a wink. That evening I sorted through the remaining papers, not to send but to prepare. Because once a wave starts, you don't stop it, you guide it. I opened a small notebook and began jotting down notes. Who had reacted, who hadn't, who had called. I wasn't keeping score out of pettiness. I was mapping silence, the same silence that had once buried me. At midnight, I received another message, this time from a private number. "You did this." No name again, but I didn't need one. I could almost hear his voice, the same one that once called me jealous old woman during a family dinner. I typed 3 words in reply. "Truth did this." Then I deleted the conversation entirely. By the 3rd day the phone hardly stopped ringing. My sister's voice finally broke through one of the calls, frantic, brittle, fragile. "They're destroying me," she cried. "They're saying I stole from my own charity. Can you imagine how that looks?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I can." She hesitated. "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not." Her tone sharpened. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "Just quieter." That silence again, it used to make her angry. This time it made her scared. "People are saying things," she whispered. "Things only you could have known." I looked down at my cup of tea, steam rising like smoke from a controlled burn. "People remember more than you think," I said. "Did you do it?" she demanded. I smiled. "You already decided I ruined things. Why stop believing it now?" She hung up before I could hear her cry. By Friday the cracks had turned to collapse. The local paper printed a follow-up. "Investigation expands, financial irregularities linked to family business." The groom's company had suspended him. Her foundation had frozen accounts. The reporters started knocking at doors. They came to mine too, polite, curious, unaware. "Ma'am, we're looking into some documents we received anonymously. You might have been contacted." I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "No, I keep to myself." They thanked me and left. The moment their car turned the corner, I closed the door and exhaled, slow, satisfied. That night I took the last envelope, the one I hadn't sent yet. It was addressed to a lawyer I once worked with, A quiet man who owed me a favor. Inside were the trust documents, the proof of my sister's forged signature. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper, feeling the groove of the pen's stroke. For a moment I hesitated. Not out of mercy but memory. My father's handwriting was still at the bottom of that page, neat and certain. "Whichever of you keeps this, keep it wisely," he'd written. I whispered, "I'm trying, Dad." Then sealed the envelope. At dawn I walked to the post box at the end of the street. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves and bakery bread. The street was empty. Only the sound of my shoes on the pavement, steady and slow. I slid the final envelope into the box. It made a soft sound, barely audible. But to me it was thunder. I stood there for a while, watching the horizon blush with morning light. For the first time in years I didn't feel invisible. I felt necessary. I turned back toward the house and before stepping inside, whispered to the wind, "Truth travels faster than lies. Let's see who it finds first." Back at the table, the box lay closed under the morning light. I placed my hand over it gently, not as a goodbye but as a promise. It wasn't revenge yet. Not fully. It was justice learning how to walk. And as I poured myself another cup of tea, the world outside buzzed with the noise I had set in motion. A storm with no name but one everyone would feel. By the next morning the air itself seemed heavy, like the sky knew what had been unleashed. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same chair, the same cup, the same quiet. Only the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds of movement. Neighbors whispering, a car engine starting, a door slamming shut. The world looked the same, yet nothing in it was. I hadn't left the house since mailing that final envelope. I didn't need to. The world was delivering updates for me, through headlines, phone calls I didn't answer, and the slow, steady hum of gossip leaking through thin walls. And then that afternoon there was a knock. It wasn't timid or furious. Just steady, 3 short taps, 1 pause, then 2 more. The kind of knock that tries to sound polite while holding back desperation. I didn't move right away. I sat still listening. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unspoken. I could already sense who it was. When I finally opened the door, she was there. My sister. She stood on the porch like a stranger who'd lost her way. Her once perfect hair hung limp and wet, streaked with rain and panic. The pale pink dress she wore looked too delicate for weather like this, and her makeup, what was left of it, had melted into uneven patches around her eyes. For a moment neither of us spoke. Only the wind filled the space between us, tugging at her sleeve, carrying the faint scent of perfume and regret. She started, her voice breaking on the first word. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without answering. She walked in slowly, her heels clicking across the floor, the sound hollow against the wood. The house smelled of cinnamon tea and rain. She looked around as though she hadn't been here in years, which was true. The last time she'd stood in this kitchen, she told me to stop making things about yourself. Now she looked small. I motioned toward the table. "Sit," I said. She did. For a long minute I busied myself with the kettle, the ritual giving my hands something to do. The soft whistle rose, familiar and grounding. When I placed the cup in front of her, she stared at the steam like it might tell her what to say. Finally she spoke. "They're tearing everything apart," she whispered. "The foundation, his company, our accounts are frozen. Reporters keep calling. Mom won't stop crying." Her voice shook, not from guilt I could tell but from fear. I sipped my tea, pretending to listen casually. "You said our accounts," I said. "That's interesting." She flinched slightly. "You think I deserve this?" I didn't answer. "You think this is funny?" she snapped suddenly, her tone rising, desperate for someone to blame. "I'm being humiliated." I set my cup down gently. "No," I said. "You're being seen." She looked at me, then really looked. The recognition in her eyes was slow, like dawn over a ruined city. "It was you," she whispered. "Wasn't it?" I tilted my head slightly. "What do you mean?" Her hands trembled on the table. "The letters. The documents. Who else would have known all that?" I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just leaned back in my chair, watching her crumble under her own certainty. She buried her face in her hands. "Why would you do this to me?" I took a breath. "You remember when you told me not to come to your wedding? That I'd ruin your perfect day?" That's not the same, she shot back. This is everything. Exactly, I said quietly. Everything you built on lies. For a while neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow drip of rain from her coat onto the floor. She looked exhausted, haunted in a way no amount of makeup could disguise. Finally she asked, almost childlike, "How much do they know?" "Enough," I said. "Enough to destroy me?" I met her eyes. "No one destroys you, Claire. You just finally stopped hiding from yourself." Her lip trembled. "You sound like him," she whispered. "Like Dad when he'd lecture us." That stung, but I didn't show it. My father's warnings had been wasted on her. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the clouds hung low and gray, pressing against the rooftops like a ceiling that might crack. "You know," I said slowly, "when you told everyone I was jealous, I almost believed it. I thought maybe you were right, that I envied your house, your husband, your spotlight. But it wasn't envy. It was exhaustion. I was tired of watching you win by stepping on people." She said nothing. The clock ticked softly on the wall. She stared down at her tea, untouched and cold now. "Mom said you wouldn't help me," she murmured after a while. "I won't." "You really hate me that much?" I turned toward her. "I don't hate you. Hate takes energy. You're just finally facing what you've earned." Her eyes filled not with guilt but with panic. "He's gone," she said suddenly. "He disappeared after the interviews started. Took what money he could. The police called this morning, they can't find him." I raised an eyebrow. So the perfect husband vanished when things got hard. Imagine that. Her voice cracked. "He left me with nothing. Not even enough for rent." "You have friends," I said. "They've all turned their backs," she said bitterly. "They think I lied to them." I gave a small shrug. "Maybe that's because you did." Her face twisted in disbelief. "You're enjoying this," she accused. "I can hear it in your voice." I met her glare calmly. "I'm not enjoying it. I'm remembering it." "Remembering what?" "All the times I sat where you are now, begging for understanding while you called me dramatic, selfish, jealous." Her mouth opened, then closed again. No apology came out. The rain started again, harder this time. I stood, took her cup and poured it out in the sink. She flinched at the sound. "You should go," I said. She didn't move. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else." For a brief second something old and fragile stirred in me. A memory of childhood, of holding her hand on the walk to school. But that girl was gone, and the woman in front of me had buried her long ago. I handed her a small towel. "Dry off before you leave," I said softly. "You'll catch a cold." "You can't be serious," she said, voice trembling. "You'd throw your own sister out like this?" "You threw me out first," I said simply. "You just used fancier words." She stood slowly, her shoulders shaking. I watched as she looked around the house again, her gaze lingering on the small details she'd never cared to notice before. The neatness, the warmth, the quiet. "This place," she murmured. "It feels peaceful." "It is," I said. "It's what happens when noise leaves." She bit her lip. "I wish I'd understood that sooner." "Too late," I replied gently. "Peace doesn't wait for latecomers." She walked to the door but stopped halfway, turning to me. "Was it really worth it?" she asked. "All this?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Yes," I said. "Because now when people say your name they'll finally see who you are. And when they say mine maybe they'll remember I existed." She didn't reply. Just lowered her head and walked out. I closed the door quietly behind her. The rain's rhythm softened, fading into a hush that filled the room like a sigh. I walked back to the table, still warm from where she'd sat. Her cup left a ring of moisture, a faint, imperfect circle. I wiped it away with the corner of my sleeve. Outside, I watched her car struggle down the muddy road, its tires spinning before finding traction. She didn't look back. I sat down again, my hands folded in my lap. The house felt even quieter now, but it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a clean one, like air after a storm. For a long while I just breathed. Later that night, as darkness settled in, I found myself standing by the window again. The reflection staring back at me looked older, sharper, steadier. I thought about what she'd said. Was it worth it? Yes, it was. But not for revenge. For recognition. For the kind of justice that doesn't scream, just whispers long enough to be heard. Still, something tugged at me. A loose thread I couldn't ignore. Her husband was gone. The news hadn't mentioned an arrest yet. And deep down I knew unfinished stories never stayed buried for long. I turned off the lamp, the room falling into a soft amber half-light. The rain had stopped again. As I headed to bed, I glanced once more toward the door, the same one she'd walked through hours ago, and whispered to the empty room. She came to me once for mercy. Next time it won't be her knocking. I was right. 2 mornings later the doorbell rang. Not hurried, not panicked. Official. A slow, deliberate chime that carried through the quiet house like a sentence being read aloud. I stood for a moment, my hand resting on the table, listening to it echo. Then I opened the door. 2 officers stood outside. One young, one older. The rain had followed them, dripping off their coats in soft, rhythmic taps. "Mrs. Allen?" the older one asked. "Yes." He nodded, his expression kind but measured. "We're investigating a domestic case involving your sister and her husband. We'd like to ask a few questions." I stepped aside. "Of course." They entered, polite but cautious, the way people walk into a house that feels too quiet. The younger officer glanced around, his eyes pausing on the teapot, the open notebook, the faint smell of lavender polish. The older one took out a small recorder. "We believe your sister's husband fled town 2 nights ago. His vehicle was found abandoned near the highway. There's evidence of fraud, possibly theft." I folded my hands. "I see. He also left behind some messages." The officer paused, watching me carefully. "Threats, actually. Toward your family." That part I didn't expect. "Threats?" I repeated. He nodded. "Written messages, angry voice notes. He mentioned your name specifically." I looked down for a moment, the corner of my mouth twitching in something that might have been a smile. "I suppose guilt has a long reach." He gave a faint, sympathetic nod. "If anything happens, call us immediately." "Of course." They thanked me and left. I stood by the doorway watching them walk to their car, water puddles splashing under their boots. So that was it. The man who had once bragged about control now running from the truth like a coward. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence settle again. The rain outside softened, replaced by the low hum of distant thunder. The storm wasn't over, but it was almost done collecting. By evening the phone started again. My mother first. Her voice cracked before I even spoke. "He's gone," she said. "The police are everywhere. Your sister's collapsed. She won't talk to anyone." I kept my voice steady. "Then she'll have to listen." He sniffled. "You don't understand. This family can't survive more shame." "Mom," I said softly, "the shame isn't new. It's just louder now." There was nothing left to say after that. She hung up. That night I took out the wooden box one last time. The cedar scent rose again, soft and nostalgic, like an old memory trying to be forgiven. It wasn't heavy anymore. Most of what mattered had already been sent, revealed, or buried in someone else's desk drawer by now. What remained were only fragments, reminders. The photo of my father and his note. A single flash drive. And one envelope marked Claire. I hadn't opened that one in years. It wasn't evidence. It was something different. A letter I'd written long ago, the night my father died. I'd never mailed it. I'd never even reread it. Till now. My handwriting looked smaller than I remembered. Uncertain, almost trembling. "Dear Claire, one day you'll need saving and I won't be there to do it. I hope you learn that mercy isn't weakness. But I also hope you learn that mercy runs out." I folded it back carefully. Maybe tonight was the night she'd finally understand it. By morning, news spread faster than sleep. Local businessman found dead in motel room. Apparent overdose suspected. His name was in bold print, her name in italics below it. Under investigation. I read it once, slowly, then turned off the television. The rain had stopped. The world outside gleamed clean again, as if the sky had finally exhaled. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and set 2 cups out. Habit perhaps. Or memory. The second cup stayed empty. The knock came later that afternoon. Not police. Not reporters. Her. I didn't need to look, I knew that sound now. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in, shaking, pale as a ghost, her eyes swollen and hollow. The confident tilt of her chin was gone. He's dead, she said flatly. No tears this time. Just shock. The kind that freezes the soul before it breaks it. I know, I said softly. I read. She looked at me, desperate, searching for something. Understanding, absolution, maybe even hatred to hold on to. You think this is what you wanted? She said. Her voice trembled with disbelief. He's gone. Everything's gone. Are you happy now? I stared at her for a long time. Happy? I said quietly. No. I don't do happy. I do closure. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. For the first time I saw her shoulders tremble, not in rage but surrender. I don't know where to go, she whispered. I poured her tea without asking. Start anywhere you like, I said. She didn't move to drink it. Just stared at the steam rising between us. I didn't know he was that cruel, she said after a while. He made me believe everything would be fine. That he loved me. I nodded slowly. That's what he did best. He made people believe. Her voice dropped lower. And you knew? I knew enough, I said. She looked up, eyes glistening. Then why didn't you warn me? I smiled faintly. I did. You just called it jealousy. That silenced her completely. For a long moment we sat in that quiet, two women linked by blood and betrayal, separated by choice. She finally spoke, almost a whisper. I lost everything. No, I said softly. You lost what wasn't yours. Her eyes flicked toward the box sitting open on the table. That's where you kept it all, isn't it? The secrets. Yes, I said. And the lessons. He stared at it, then at me. You could destroy anyone with that. I could, I said. But I won't. Not unless I have to again. Her brow furrowed. Again. I met her gaze evenly. Truth doesn't end when people die. It just changes hands. A faint noise outside broke the moment. A car pulling into the driveway. She looked up, startled. Who's that? I peered through the curtain. The older officer from before stepped out, hat in hand. I opened the door before he could knock. Sorry to bother you again, he said quietly. We found something in your brother-in-law's car. He'd been keeping files. Bank accounts, transfers, some in your sister's name. I nodded. Thank you for letting me know. He hesitated. He also left a note. Just one line. He handed it to me, a folded scrap of paper, damp at the corners. I opened it slowly. Tell her she wins. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I passed it to my sister. Her hands shook as she read it. When she looked up, she was crying again. But this time they weren't tears for him. He knew, she said softly. Yes, I said. And now so do you. After the officer left, she stood by the doorway, staring at the rain starting again outside. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now, I said, you rebuild. Without pretending. She turned to me, uncertain. And you? I collect, I said. She frowned. Collect what? I picked up the box, closed the lid for the last time and placed my hand over it. Peace. The kind that's paid for in full. She left a few minutes later, walking slowly through the drizzle. Her steps were heavy but steady. She didn't look back this time either, but I could tell she finally understood. When her car disappeared down the road, I walked to the back garden. The air was cool, smelling faintly of soil and wet mint. I set the box down on the old wooden bench and sat beside it. The garden was my father's favorite place. He used to say, everything you plant returns one day. Some things bloom, some rot. That's just the deal. I opened the box one last time. The papers rustled softly in the wind. Then one by one I began to feed them into the small metal bin beside the bench, the one I used to burn leaves in autumn. Each sheet curled and blackened, turning to ash that floated into the air like forgotten voices. The final one was the photo, the two little girls on the back steps, smiling. For a moment I hesitated. Then I placed it gently on the flame. It burned slower than the rest. When the last ember went dark, I whispered, "Debt collected." As the sun began to set, I stayed there, listening to the soft crackle of cooling ash and the sound of rain meeting earth. The air felt cleaner, lighter, the kind that follows an ending no one saw coming. Inside, the phone rang again. I let it. I didn't need updates anymore. The world could talk all it wanted. My story had already closed itself. I walked back to the door, wiping the soot from my fingers, and turned off the porch light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. And as I locked the door, I said it out loud, softly, firmly, to the empty house that had carried every silence I'd ever kept. They buried me in shame. I rose in truth. And I collected every debt. If this story touched you, don't leave quietly. Hit subscribe for more powerful stories of revenge, family, and redemption. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?